And now we'll have an anniversary minute. Let's welcome Patty.
Good morning. So we're going to be celebrating our 60th anniversary of this building, but this building is mixed with old and new. So back in 1963, with our Byram Church, that was the year it was sold, but it was sold with the provision, the condition that we would be able to stay there until September of 1964, as well as remove some very big things, like our stained glass windows are from the Byram Church, and you can't see, maybe on the way back from communion, you can see the ones that are up in the balcony too that are lighted. Our baptismal font, and also removed from the old church, was the organ, part of the organ. So the organ came from the church, as well as we were had donated to us from the New York hospital a large organ, and so the two were put together and constructed together to make the one that we have today. Besides that, also coming from the old church were pews and a pulpit and other things that were donated as memorials. So then in the building of this church in the early 1960s, large items were also given and donated in memorial. The outside cross, outside that would light up, was donated and given by Emil and Marion Trenk in memory of their son Edward, Rob's brother. The large cross here was donated by Miss Bergevin, who at the time was the superintendent of the Sunday school, and she donated it in memory of her family. And the altar was donated by the Altar Guild, and at the time of the dedication service in 1966, actually, the dedication service, the altar had not arrived yet. It was made with Italian marble, and they had a stand-in altar that they had been using, and then a few weeks after the dedication service, then the real altar, the Italian marble altar, was installed, and then it was dedicated by itself. Besides that, there were in total 19 items that were donated and given in memory throughout the church. Pews, the pulpit, chancel chairs, all different types of things, communion rails, and that. And this lectern, as a matter of fact, so I'd like to read the prayer that was said when this lectern was dedicated. O Lord, receive and bless the lectern which we set apart for thy worship and service. Be present by thy Spirit, we pray thee, when thy word is read in this place, and help us to hear it aright, that we may bring forth the fruits of righteousness. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. And hallowed be this lectern as memorial to Emma A. Gherkin. The memory of the just is blessed. That's our anniversary minute. So good morning.
Good morning.
So today we're going to take a little step back in time, back to 1965, which is our anniversary year. So back in 1965, Lyndon Johnson was president. United States planes bombed north of Vietnam as U.S. Marines invaded Da Nang in the first deployment of U.S. combat troops. Martin Luther King Jr. led a march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, protesting voting discrimination, and later then, that year, the Voting Rights Act was passed. Malcolm X was assassinated in New York City. Allen Ginsberg coined the term flower power to describe his nonviolent strategy of political action. Pope Paul VI led 90,000 people at Yankee Stadium in the first papal mass on American soil. The Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund. The Great Blackout of 1965 caused the power systems throughout the Northeast to fail, plunging New York, Boston, and other cities into darkness during the evening rush hour. The life expectancy was, try to guess, 70.2 years old. On the lighter side, in fashion, the miniskirt, designed by Mary Quant, appeared in London and became all the rage. In sports, Joe Namath signed a contract with the New York Jets for $400,000. And the two professional football champions were the Buffalo Bills and the Green Bay Packers, and the LA Dodgers won the Baseball World Series. So popular songs of 1965 were Back in My Arms Again by the Supremes, Downtown by Petula Clark, 8 Days a Week by the Beatles, Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, Help Me Rhonda by the Beach Boys, and I Got You Babe by Sonny and Cher. Favorite movies were The Sound of Music, Dr. Zhivago, and Help. And finally, TV favorites were Batman, Hogan's Heroes, The Andy Griffith Show, and at Christmas time premiered A Charlie Brown Christmas. So that was the year, 1965, that St. Paul's laid the cornerstone of our new church right here at this address, with a bright future ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So for our anniversary minute today, I was going to talk about the property that the church bought. So our anniversary is celebrated in 2025, and the church here was built in 1965. So in the 1950s, when the church was in Byram, they were kind of busting in the seams and felt that they really needed a lot more space, especially parking. Parking was a real problem there. So in 1958, the church, St. Paul's Lutheran Church, bought the Carey property, which was on Comely Avenue. Not this property, but one that was across the street and down a bit on Comely Avenue. It was 2 acres, and so the church had that from 1958, but in 1961, the Ward property, this property, became available. And that property was considered to be much better because it was on the corner of King and Comely. It was 7 acres instead of 2, and it was a 17-room house right over there, which we called the chapel. It was in that house they made some renovations in it to create a chapel area, offices, and the Sunday school. So in 1961, our church bought the Ward property, and they sold the Carey property. They were still in Byram until 1964. So just a few words about the Ward property. The Ward property was the Ward was of Russell, Birdsell and Ward, which was a company that made nuts, bolts, and screws, started in Portchester in the 1860s. It was very successful. They were known for very high quality of product, and they are still around today, although no longer in Portchester, but they are global. They even have address in Europe and in China. So William Ward was the W of RBW, and so he was one of the founders of there. And so he built a castle for himself, the castle that we see there. He built it in 1876. So next year, that castle will be 150 years old. RBW in that company was a devoted employee known as Samuel Comely. So we know Comely, the street is Comely Avenue. He was a master salesman, the first one to decide that he could be a traveling salesman and sell the product throughout the country. So he worked for RB&W for 50 years. So that's 1863 to 1913. So here we have Comely Avenue as our address from Samuel Comely, who worked for the Wards in RBW. And more recently, Pastor has met Winifred Ward and at the Muse, and she lived in the chapel, right? So we have that connection there. So there's our anniversary minute.
Patty has an anniversary minute for us.
So our building has adapted and changed over the 60 years. So over the course of these 60 years, our church building and property have gone through changes that have been directed by leaders and church councils in our past. So one can see the wisdom and eye to the future that those members had, and we have benefited very much from their actions in those changes. So one of the first changes was the sale of the chapel, the building next to us, and surrounding land in the 1980s. The money from that sale was used for some big improvements to the church, one of which was the paved parking lot that we have now. Before that, the parking lot was long, barely paved, and dark at night. So now we have new pavement, lines, lights, and curbs that help the safety and convenience of our. Also at that time, the Luther Room, which is the meeting room downstairs in the church, it only had a cement floor with unpainted cinder block walls, looked very unfinished. Funds from the sale also went to renovations to this area that included a finished floor and ceiling, painted walls, a kitchen area, or which was officially known, as Pastor Beljean told us, a serving pantry, actually not a kitchen, and nearby restrooms. So this finished room, kitchen, and bathrooms have been well used. When the church established the child care center, the Luther Room became the main gathering space for council meetings, Sunday school classes, and potluck meals. Years later, there was a time when the church was in need of money, and the village of Rye Brook was assessing the church water fees based on the amount of frontage that we had on King Street. The church then decided to sell another part of its property on King Street that was just north of our current address. Houses were built in a street, Castle View Court was put in. The money from this sale ended up later going to the startup costs of the child care center. Pardon me. When the child care center was created in the late 1990s, more alterations were required. Downstairs in the large room, a long ramp on the side of the room of the entire wall was installed. It needed to be that long so that the pitch of the ramp would be gradual. An office for the director, sinks, cabinets, and a restroom laundry area were added. Many of these changes were dictated by the code for daycares. Other changes have been made to the church to include people and make them feel welcome. To accommodate members and visitors who needed wheelchair assistance, an outdoor ramp was installed. This involved moving a side doorway into the church. And more recently, upstairs, the bathrooms were in great need of an update and fixing, so they were remodeled and upgraded with a changing station to help parents with babies. Finally, our church bells have changed over time. The architect, Maurice Sallow, who drew up the blueprints for our church, included future plans for the church. For instance, a phase B and C that could come in the future. One of these phases included a large bell tower. The plan was that outside our front double door entrance, at the bottom of the stairs, would be a carport covering that drop-off spot. The carport would extend over the driveway, and then it would turn into, or there would be a modern-looking bell tower, taller even than the church. Obviously, we didn't do that. So, when the church was still new, we used to have vinyl records that played the sound of church bells playing familiar hymns and songs. It was up in the room where you turn the lights on for the sanctuary. The speaker for the music sounded outside for everyone here as they came to church. Now, we still hear the bell tones as we come to church, but they're from an actual bell. And it's a very old bell that has the name Abendroth Brothers on it. 3 Abendroth brothers immigrated from Germany in the first part of the 1800s and built a foundry in Portchester. The foundry produced cast iron products like cast iron stoves, heats, and bells. The company was in business from 1840 to 1920, and it seems likely that some of the St. Paul's early parishioners worked in the Abendroth foundry. The bell has strong ties to our community, and we're grateful to have this connection to our past. And we will, as Pastor mentioned, we'll celebrate our 60th anniversary on Sunday, March 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
I'm not Patty. She's put so much time and energy into this, but I'm going to read what she wrote for this, the 6th anniversary minute. St. Paul's has been very lucky over the past 60 years to have wonderful ministers who gave thoughtful and insightful sermons each Sunday. All of these pastors also were effective leaders, whether it be on projects or at a council meeting. They provided compassionate pastoring, whether at a hospital bedside, a graveside, or just by one side in prayer. St. Paul's congregations have been blessed with the great work of these ministers. Pastor Frymouth, 1950s to the 1960s, was an especially kind and compassionate person. Although he suffered great personal tragedies of loss, his faith remained. He led the congregation through the immense project of envisioning a new church, building it, and then transitioning to the new space. Pastor Sanborn, 1970s to the mid-1980s, was known to be a gentle soul who was kind and lighthearted. From time to time, Pastor Sanborn would give the congregation a surprise sermon. He would appear as a biblical character in costume. He would speak to the congregation from the perspective of that character. Once at Easter time, he appeared as a centurion and told the Easter story through the eyes of the Roman soldier. Pastor Belgine, mid-1980s to 2002, worked diligently with the newly formed Child Care Committee to create St. Paul's Child Care Center, which is such a vital part of our church today. Pastor Belgine said that he brought a large folding table to the church office. It held the many tasks that needed to be done. That is, all the forms and applications required to become a state licensed daycare facility. His skills and fortitude successfully led us through that long process. Pastor Israel, 2003 through 2008, was our first female pastor. She is remembered for her children's sermons on the steps. She would engage the children and give a brief talk that was enjoyed by not just the children, but by the adults as well. The annual Fall Fling got off the ground with the help and leadership of Pastor Israel and others, although the first one was a spring fling. And many of us remember what she said at the end of every service, "You betcha." Pastor O'Hanlon, 2009 until hopefully forever, is our first pastor to embrace technology and reach out to members through social media and Zoom. This was really vital during the COVID pandemic. He has established strong relationships with local leaders of other faiths and in the surrounding community. In fact, at the Martin Luther King Food to Grow On Day of Service, one of our local leaders told the group that Pastor Jim was asked to give the opening prayer at the New York State Assembly. Pastor Jim's message is all are welcome.
Thank you, Chip. Thank you, Patty.
Yeah.
And now Patty's going to come up with her weekly anniversary minute. Good morning. So for the past 60 years, St. Paul's has occupied this building that resembles a church, or a ship or an ark. A lot of the church's inner workings are the same as when Pastor Freimuth and his congregation moved in. Many of the same positions remain, but the people have changed. We still have a pastor, secretary, and council, but now we also have deacons and women on the council. We have Holy Communion and fellowship after church, but instead of once a month, we now have communion and fellowship every week. Over the years, St. Paul's has had many faithful servants who have helped guide the church along. Some of these important people are the staff in our church office. These unsung heroes were, and are, B. Morell during Pastor Freimuth's time, Wendy Thorns and Joan Bologna, about the time when Pastor Sanborn was here, Adele Butt-Dansky during Pastor Belgine's time, Barbara Thistle during Pastor Israel, and Donna Smith is in the office now during Pastor Hanlon's time. These smart and friendly ladies have played such important roles in running St. Paul's. You can see some of the differences in the church by looking around, too. As we become a smaller church, we didn't like being so spread out in the sanctuary, so we removed the back pews. The congregation now feels more together as a group, and the new space in the back has been very useful for a lot of different activities, from council meetings to yoga to craft workshops to blood drives. The church also has a new altar, which can be moved so the congregation can be closer to it. Both the pews and altar adjustment are an effort to make this large, majestic space feel warm and welcoming. In an effort to make the church feel welcoming to the visitor, we have also made changes to what we use to worship. The church secretary used to run off the bulletins by turning the crank of the mimeograph machine. That was when we were, and that's during this 60-year time, and that was when we were using the red hymnal. The bulletin would tell you what page in the hymnal to use for the liturgy or hymns. Later, the church moved to the green hymnal. Bookmarks were made for people to use to help keep track of the liturgy and the hymns. The congregation felt, though, that it was still very difficult for a visitor to follow our service. For example, the liturgy used page numbers from the bottom, where the hymns used page numbers from the top. We might even use a second hymnal, the Blue Book, for a hymn or two. The council decided to have the whole service in one place, printed in the bulletin and copied on the Xerox machine. We have a bunch of outreach projects today that serve the community, but in our church building's history, a lot of community service was done by the circles of the LCW, that is the Lutheran Church Women. The circles were groups of ladies who met each month or so and each circle had a name, like the Loyalty Circle or Faith Circle. So, at their meetings, they would have a devotion and a project. Some examples of the projects were collecting and putting together personal hygiene kits or educational kits to be sent to Lutheran aid groups, collecting items needed at Navajo reservations, baking and mailing Valentine treats to our church's college students. Of course, we have the hat and mitten tree and knitting prayer shawls and blankets. These are just a few of the many meaningful community service projects that these ladies accomplished. And of course, the largest change in our church has been the Child Care Center. It was created with the mission of reaching out and serving the community. The added benefit was that our church building would be productively in use during the week instead of just empty. Eventually, the Child Care Center would be able to help the church financially. It was a huge venture and took perseverance, but all of these goals have been accomplished. So what will the next 60 years bring to St. Paul's? We hope you can join us on March 9th for our anniversary. We'll have a special service, special music, lunch, and an extra special dessert. And you'll need to remember to set your clocks ahead since it is the first day of daylight savings time.
So this is Hyacinth, my friend. So Hyacinth, you were a member at St. Paul's
Yes, I was.
and you were a musician.
I was the organist. I
Mhm.
taught Sunday school and belonged to the Women's Missionary Society.
And that's where you got the idea to be a missionary?
Correct. So St. Paul's was a very important part of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm so delighted the pastor still comes to see me. Delighted.
So when you were there was Pastor Freimuth.
Yes.
Yeah. I've met his daughter, Martha.
Yeah, she's living now where?
She's in New Haven, I think. Yeah. So when you were a missionary, where did you go?
To Argentina.
Uh-huh.
Stayed in the same place for 5 years. First 5 years I taught in the Lutheran Bible Institute, training Argentine girls to be parish workers,
Mhm.
because there was a shortage of pastors. And then I stayed home for 5 years and worked at, I think I worked at St. Paul's
Yeah. Yeah.
from 63 to 68.
Uh-huh.
And then in 68, I went back to Argentina, totally different job. I worked with the two other young people. We were a team working with the youth of the church, planning programs with them, for them.
Mhm.
Enjoyed
Yeah.
both 5-year terms.
And then you were ordained.
And then when I got back from my second tour of duty,
Mhm.
by then the church decided to ordain, the Lutheran Church decided to ordain women in 1970.
Mhm.
I came home in 73, decided I wanted to be ordained, but I needed more seminary training, so I had 2 years at Mount Airy.
Okay.
I had 1 year before I went.
Yeah.
So,
So there weren't many women then.
No. And I remember where they had the clergy blouses. And I got on the elevator once, a woman looked at me and she said, "What are you anyway?" I said, "I'm a Lutheran pastor." Her response was, "Only the Lutherans are crazy enough to ordain a woman." I had to laugh
Yeah.
because I thought that was funny.
And then you served in Philadelphia.
Yes. Church was at the 5th and Sedgley and was there for 13 years.
Oh,
Enjoyed my ministry.
yeah.
It was tough. It was really tough. I went from door to door,
Mhm.
inviting people if they didn't have a church to come to Bethel, but most of them belonged to St. Veronica's Roman Catholic Church. So
Yeah.
very tough ministry.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm so delighted that Pastor Hanlon comes and visits me now
It's always a fun visit.
every year now for how many years?
12 years, I guess. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
He-
Except for
he-
COVID.
Except for COVID.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I really enjoy his
Mm.
visits and I feel connected to St. Paul through him.
And we remember you. People remember you and they ask about you.
Good,
And so I'll show them this video.
great, thank
Yeah.
you.